I speak to you today in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
First, a word of apology to a few people who are here who will have heard most of this already when they were at Advent Cafe on Wednesday evening, but thank you for coming again. When Reverend Martha asked me to speak of a saint or someone who had significantly impacted my spiritual journey, I almost immediately responded that I wanted to speak about Reverend Bill Blott. Now, most of you won't know Bill, but Bill was an honorary assistant here at St. George's in the 1990s. Bill was a big man, but a gentle man. He had a smile on his face and a glow in his heart that radiated out to others. He was a writer, a farmer, a historian, a poet, and a composer of hymns on top of his service as a minister in the Anglican Church. He was a devout man who led by example. He was clear on his values and lived his life with integrity. He was a teacher who inspired me and many others. Bill challenged himself through questioning, and he challenged others in the same way. There are many things that are relatively simple explanations of text, but Bill always challenged us to dig deeper, to look behind the obvious answers, and to think and to feel the answers to these questions. Now, Bill was an example of a lifelong journey of discovery and surprise. He was curious. He always wanted to better understand his own faith and help others to develop their faith. Bill was truly a saint. Now, although I had worked with Bill on many occasions, it was only after his death that I learned more about his life story and his contribution to the overall Anglican Church. In the early 1960s, he was involved with a group of priests who were working to basically re-energize the liturgy of the church. The group pioneered bringing back public baptism, because at that point, baptism had been a private service. They championed linking the baptismal service to the liturgy, to the Eucharist. They also restructured the whole liturgy of Holy Week to focus on it as a unit, not to focus simply on the end or on Palm Sunday. What they did is they brought it so it was united, so it was accessible to people. Now, in the 1980s, he became really interested in Christian formation and how you could get people interested in continuing their faith journey. He recognized it wasn't enough to come and simply sit in these seats on Sunday for an hour or two, but really it was about how you lived your life and how you put into practice the knowledge that you'd learned at church. He was clearly at the forefront of an initiative to both update church practice, but also to bring those teachings to each one of the people that sat in the pews and to those that weren't there. Now, you would think that from those descriptions about Bill that at the beginning that he had a pretty full life. Well, on top of that, in the middle of his career as an ordained minister, he decided that he would become a teacher. And he went back and he got a master's degree in education and was a teacher for 16 years. Now, Bill would be the first one to tell us that time as a teacher and that training as a teacher was very important to him in his later work when he came back to the church. because he had learned about it's not just enough to have knowledge. You have to be able to convey that knowledge, and also you have to get people to apply that knowledge. Now, after Bill retired from full-time ministry, he and his wife, Marion, retired to a family farm down in Dunnville, well, south of Dunnville, right on Lake Erie. And he came to St. George's as an honorary assistant. Now, at that time, we had a lay-led ministry that was called Journey in Faith. Bill became one of our advisors. He became our chief advisor. And he and his wife, Marion, who was not just his partner in his life, but a partner in his ministry, were involved in this process with us. Now, Journey in Faith was really about faith formation. It was for people, whether they were new to the Anglican Church, or whether indeed they were people who had left the church, or whether in the past they'd had no knowledge of the Anglican Church. Now, there were 5 of us who were lay leaders: Pat and Vic Cece, Sue Bartlett, Sue, my wife, and myself. We're all still members of this congregation here today. Now, we would lead these weekly discussion groups that focused on themes such as things like the Lord's Prayer, Light and Darkness, or the Nicene Creed. And each week we would get together and we would come up with a series of questions to lead a discussion that was for about an hour each Sunday. Now, we did 3 to 4 of these groups of sessions a year, and they ranged anywhere from 4 weeks to about 8 weeks in length. So for about half the year, we were doing this kind of work. And I've got to say that it was quite intriguing, because in many ways, as we were supposed to be leaders, but I think we actually maybe we got more out of it than some of the people that were there, simply because of the degree of involvement in learning. Now, the one thing that St. Bill, as we'll call him today, was very consistent about was the topic of intentionality. That is, acting on your beliefs. It's not enough simply to have knowledge. You need to act on that. Now, Bill would continually challenge us in our sessions and how we planned those sessions to focus on this question of intentionality. Because for Bill, this was one of the biggest problems that the church had. We had people who would come and sit in the pews and leave Sunday mornings. And it wasn't necessarily having impact on their lives when they were out beyond this church. Did people know that they were indeed Christians or Anglicans when they went about their daily business each day? Bill believed that you should be intentional, you should act on those beliefs, so people should be able to tell that indeed you're different than someone who doesn't come and doesn't believe. Now, Bill was quite strong on this belief, to say the least, and basically he focused on making God a priority in our daily lives. And developing that relationship with God is a critical piece of that intentionality. Prayer is the other important component of that. Now, I want to focus a little bit about the reading that we had tonight from Luke. And Reverend Martha is always very quick to point out that she doesn't have anything to do with choosing the readings. Well, this afternoon, that is not true. She chose this reading when I told her what I wanted to talk about. I must say that when I read it the first time, I thought, oh, why did I get this reading? Maybe I could have looked one up myself and found something else. But anyway, that wasn't what really happened, so that was that. Now, I think there's a German philosopher back in the 1650s wrote a lot, and he came up with this little piece. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. And I think in a very short version, that's what Bill would say intentionality is. First, we have to learn, but we must apply. Being willing to apply is not enough, we actually have to do it. Now, Luke's reading to us here really breaks into 4 pieces. One about that we have to hate our family and ourselves. Second, that we must carry our own cross. Third, that we have to give up all our possessions. And fourthly, kind of, what are the costs of not following him, following Jesus? Now, I've got to say that when I read the first section about we have to hate our families and ourselves, I didn't think that sounded like Jesus' normal message about loving your neighbor. But I do believe that what Jesus was getting at was making the point that we must put God first. We must put God first ahead of everything and everyone else. God must be our center, not a peripheral concern. If God is the center of life, then we will be intentional in our daily lives. I find it interesting so often that we hear people talk about how they make certain decisions on Sunday morning, and then they go out and make decisions based on totally different principles the rest of the week. And then they come back for another Sunday. I have a hard time with that. Now, the second point about carrying our own cross, if we go back, and most of you will probably remember this, but the American Express Company had a little tagline for their ads. Membership has its privileges. Well, membership does have privileges, but it also has responsibilities and costs. And if we want to be Christian, then we have to be ready to accept those responsibilities and the costs. Now, the responsibilities, in my opinion, are about being intentional and following through on what we say we believe. Also, Jesus goes on to say that we need to get rid of all of our possessions. So does that mean we all have to take vows of poverty in order to be a follower of Jesus? I believe really what he's talking about more is in terms of how we use our gifts and resources. Do we use them for our own benefit, or do we use them for the benefit of God? Recently, one of Canada's banks had another tagline, pay yourself first. Well, I think if you're a follower of Jesus, the tagline should be, pay God first. Now, the last point that is talked about in Luke is about, he gives the 2 examples about the need to understand what you must do first before you build your tower or before you go into battle. And I think what the message from this is about what there are consequences to your decision. And if you decide that you want to become a Christian, you have to be aware of what those costs are. You have to be intentional. So you've got to use your brain and your heart together in order to do that. Now, we are each on our faith journey, and we're all at different points. You know, there was the letter from St. Paul to the Corinthians. We're called in many ways to help God implement his plan for this world. And it comes in various forms. We're not all called to do all things. In the Bible study we had with Advent Cafe last fall in the book of Acts, we learned that many of the characters in the stories were everyday people who were called to act, that is, to be intentional. They were not heroes. They were not the people who were in leadership, formal leadership roles in the community. They were people like you and I. Sometimes the people didn't understand that what they were doing and how it fit into God's plan, but they acted, they were faithful. It is the combined actions of the many people that how God's work is completed. Now, Jesus' words are tough and demanding, and what we're being asked to do is simply be intentional about what we believe and to act on it each day, and to think about it each time we make a decision. Now, the series that we do at Advent Cafe, well, we'll call it spring for now, because I think we've all had enough of winter, is called Bible the Sequel. And St. Bill was, to me, an example of the Bible living today. I invite you to be part of God's story by being intentional each day. We are each given talents and gifts, and I think the challenge is how we can use them and be intentional for the betterment of God. This is the message that St. Bill shared and acted upon in his own life. It is a message that made a lasting impression on me. Now, St. Bill stressed the importance of communicating with God through prayer. And that's another part of our faith journey and part of being intentional. And I want to leave you at the end here with a prayer that Reverend Bill shared with us near the end of the Journey in Faith program. And it's called, How Shall I Pray? Our tears prayers, Lord, our screams prayers, or groans, or sighs, or curses. Can trembling hands be lifted to you, or clenched fists, or cold sweat that trickles down my back, or the cramps that knot my stomach? Will you accept my real prayers, Lord, my real prayers rooted in the muck and mud and rock of my life, and not just the pretty, cut flower, graceful bouquet of words? Will you accept me, Lord, as I really am, a messed up mixture of glory and grime? Lord, help me. Help me to trust that you do accept me as I am, that I may be done with self-condemnation and self-pity and accept myself. Help me to accept you as you are, Lord, mysterious, hidden, strange, and unknowable, and yet to trust that your madness is wiser than my timid, self-seeking sanities, and that nothing you've ever done has really been possible, so I may dare to be a little mad too. Amen.